Hi, I'm illustrator Alice Carter, and I'm hanging out here in the playground of my very first school. So I thought, what better place to introduce you to my new book, Teaching Mrs. Muddle, written by Colleen Nelson, illustrated by me, and published by Pajama Press. This is a super fun and silly book about Kayla and her very first day of kindergarten, and her teacher, Mrs. Muddle, who has some pretty funny ways of doing things. I loved illustrating this book, and I am so happy to share it with you.
What if I get lost? I whispered to Mom. It was the first day of kindergarten. What if I couldn't find the bathroom or missed her so much I started to cry? The teacher said, "Welcome, kindergartners. I'm Mrs. Muddle." I held Mom's hand even tighter. Mrs. Muddle handed out name tags. Mom looked down at mine and laughed. "Oh, you made a mistake. This is Kayla, not Jeremy." It took a while to sort out the name tags. Then Mrs. Muddle opened the front doors and we followed her down the hall to the classroom. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Muddle was reading my favorite book, the one I knew by heart. She was making all kinds of mistakes. I gave Mom my best brave face and went to help Mrs. Muddle read the book properly. Ella, what is your favorite part of the book?
My favorite part of the book is when Miss Muddle has a pile on her head because it makes me laugh every time.
Harvey, what is your favorite part of the book?
My favorite part of the book is with me and my mom.
You might be wondering how Harvey and his mom got into the book. Well, one of the super cool things that authors and illustrators get to do is dedicate each of their books to someone. So in the past, I've dedicated my books to family, to my cats, to friends, and Harvey has been one of my biggest fans for years, and he just happens to be starting kindergarten this year. So when this story came my way, I knew for sure that I wanted to dedicate this book to Harvey. And also I thought, even better still, since it's a book about kindergarten, maybe I can sneak him into the book. So there he is. There he is, dancing in the library. Thanks, Harvey.
Alice, what was your favorite part of making the book?
My favorite part of making the book was, this is actually a really hard one because there were so many things I loved about making Teaching Mrs. Muddle. I decided when I was illustrating this book that I wanted to have a lot of fun because it's a really fun story. And so I thought I would play around with collage. So I used a lot of fun, colorful textures, especially in the characters' clothes, like you can see here in Kayla's mom's dress. I also love details, and having a story that happens in a school means there's lots of places to add in details. So I loved putting in little posters on the desks in the library. If you have this book at home, you should check out what books these kids are reading in the background. This closet full of cleaning supplies was super fun. And here, probably my favorite little detail. I don't know if you can see it here, but way back here on the cork board in the office is a photograph on the calendar of Nutsy. Nutsy is my favorite backyard squirrel, so I decided I would try to sneak Nutsy into the book too. But if I had to pick a favorite part of making this book, I think that it was that I got to be really silly. I had to get into a really silly mindset to make Mrs. Muddle come to life. So Colleen's amazing words would say things like she was making all kinds of mistakes, but then it was my job as the illustrator to show you what kind of mistake is she making. It doesn't say that in the words, so I have to show you that. So I had to come up with this idea. Mrs. Muddle's reading the book upside down. Wouldn't that be funny if you were in class and your teacher was doing that? And I had to think about, said, everyone followed the rules except for Mrs. Muddle. So I had to think about what kind of rules would she break in the gym. And I imagined being in the gym with a teacher running around, knocking over pylons, and somehow ending up with a pylon on her head. And maybe one of my most favorite scenes was the playground, because it says, I showed Mrs. Muddle how to swing and use a slide the right way, which told me that she must be doing it the wrong way. So I had a super fun time coming up with some silly ways that Mrs. Muddle was playing in the playground. Thank you to Colleen, the author, for giving me a chance to get really silly. So don't get me wrong, it wasn't that hard for me to get into a silly mindset. But making a book isn't all silly work. There's a lot of serious work and hard work that goes into it too. And lots of hard work that has already gone into a book before it gets to me, the illustrator. So the author has worked on the book probably for years, and then it goes to an editor who helps fine-tune everything. And then, lucky me, gets chosen as an illustrator for this particular book. A lot of people think that the author and the illustrator work together, when actually very rarely do they ever talk, especially during and before the project. So the book is sort of passed over to the illustrator to take and keep going with it. So I get the manuscript or the story, the words on paper, and then my job is to take it from there. So usually one of the first things I do is come up with the characters. Sometimes when I'm working on a book, I have to do pages and pages and pages of characters, looking at it going, it doesn't seem right, until one day I go, aha, and that's the character. This doesn't happen very often, but with this book, I got a very, very clear image in my mind of both Mrs. Muddle and Kayla. So pretty quickly I came up with what they were going to look like. And then here are some early sketches. For some reason I drew Kayla's head bigger, but she did have a head in the book. And Mrs. Muddle, you can see, didn't change a whole lot. And then I got the really fun part of coming up with Kayla's classmates. And even though these are mostly in the background, these characters, I really thought about all their different personalities and what the first day of school was like for them too. So here are some of the characters. Then there starts to be tons and tons of sketching. I have to figure out what happens on each page. Is it going to be a full page spread that goes across the whole page? Is it going to be sort of 2 pages? Or these are called spot illustrations, so you can tell a lot of different things going on in a few little illustrations. So that's a big part of the job. And thumbnails are the first thing, which are tiny little drawings that basically just work out the composition and what's going to be happening. Here's an example. Do you recognize this? This was one of the first little tiny sketches for the cover. And when I'm working on a project, I am surrounded by mountains and mountains of paper. Sketches and sketches and doodles and drawings and ideas. And I don't have the whole mountain here to show you, but I have a little bit of the mountain. So I usually print out some pages with the text so I can figure out where I'm going to have space. I always have to make sure there's going to be room for the words. Looks like a lot of just circles and squares, but that helps me figure out where everything's going to go. And slowly but surely, the pictures start to become a little bit clearer. Working things out, lots of notes and doodles for me. And then the sketches become clearer. And all along I am sharing these sketches with the publisher, with the art director and the editor, and sometimes the author gets a sneak peek of some of these. And once I have my drawings to the point where they're ready to go, I have them like this. And my goal with teaching Mrs. Muddle was to stay really loose and energetic because I wanted that lively feel of the book to come through in the pictures. So I would put my copy here on my late table, turn my late table on, put my watercolor paper over top, and that's when I would get to my favorite part. I'd get my pencil crayons, I'd get my watercolors, my ink, my stamps, all my collage-y stuff, and put on some music, and then I would get going. Here, let me show you. So let's draw together. This might be a great time to pause the video so that you can go grab a piece of paper and whatever you love to draw with. Crayons, marker, pencil crayon, whatever you love to draw with. So come on back. And I thought it would be fun if we drew Mrs. Muddle together. I'm going to break it down to some basic shapes and you just follow along. And if I'm going too fast at any point, you can always just pause it, catch up, and then keep going. So we're going to start with a rectangle. We want to make sure we leave a little bit of room at the top of our page. And we're going to do a rectangle. But instead of a regular rectangle with pointy corners, we're going to curve our corners a little bit like this. And do remember, there's no right or wrong with this. We're just having some fun. Now, on the side of a rectangle, we're going to draw a big letter C. And on the other side, we'll do a backward C. And then inside of those, we'll do that again. Do-do-do, la-la-la. There we go. And now, just above the top of this rectangle, we're going to do a nice curved line like so. Whoop. And another one just over top of that one. Just trust me, I know this is looking a little strange, but you will see it all come together. Let's join those two lines together. And then while we're at it, drawing lines, come down here and do 2 long lines close together. And one more nice curved line like so. Are you starting to see her? You will soon. Right down the middle of this rectangle, we'll do another line and another letter C connected to that at the bottom. And below there, we'll do a letter U. See her face starting to be clear? Let's give her some eyes. Mrs. Muddle has nice dot eyes up here. And can give her a couple more curved lines for some eyebrows. It's amazing how some simple little eyebrows can add a lot of personality. Do you know what this is here? This is that funky headband of hers. So you decorate that any way you like. In the book, she's got polka dots, but you could give her stripes, you could give her zigzags, whatever you like. Now, Mrs. Muddle is known for her earrings, so let's give her big hoop earrings. Big circle like this, and her earring in the book has a nice bead. But like I said, maybe today she's wearing a different pair of earrings, and you can design those earrings yourself. She's got lightning bolt earrings on this day. And what else is Mrs. Muddle famous for? She's famous for those curls. So in between her headband and her forehead, you can add those curls and you just do some wiggly lines. And there's definitely no right or wrong with Mrs. Muddle's hair because she's got some wild curls springing and springing all over the place. And there she is. You've drawn Mrs. Muddle. Now, maybe you want to grab another piece of paper and you can imagine what would you look like if you were a teacher and you could draw yourself as a teacher, or maybe you have a favorite teacher. Have you ever had a silly teacher like Mrs. Muddle? Well, maybe you can draw them. Thanks so much for drawing along.